Oh, you were in the web, you were in the, and then it went away.
No, I'm always so. There we are. Okay.
There
Hi,
you go.
everyone. Technical difficulties here. Thank you for tuning in to our webinar, Making Legislative Victories Matter, Implementing State Legislation on Youth Homelessness. So we'll just give it a few more seconds. I know folks are still trickling in. Um, right. Okay, so this webinar is being recorded and archived, so you'll get a copy of these slides, of this recording. It'll be sent to you in the next few days. And we want this to be a really interactive conversation. So please feel free to use the Q&A. We'll be stopping throughout the webinar to answer questions live. I believe there's an ability for me to unmute you. So at times, if you want to get more in depth, just in the Q&A, be like, unmute me, and we will unmute you and you can be part of the conversation as well. And so just to get us started, my name is Jillian Sitar. I'm the Senior Higher Ed Program Manager here at Schoolhouse Connection. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Schoolhouse, we are a national organization based in DC with a mission to overcome homelessness through education. And we do that by providing strategic advocacy and practical assistance, with many of you joining us here on the call. And so just to get us started, I really wanted to talk a little bit more about our policy advocacy work. And so we work, and I'm sure most of you work directly with youth a lot, and that helps and is so impactful on that individualistic level. But working on policy, it is a way to really impact and enforce systemic change on a much greater scale. And our works both on, the federal side and state side. And sometimes on our federal policy, things don't necessarily, work or move as quickly. And we have such great success with our state policy. And so for this webinar, we're going to be doing a deeper dive into California policy. And I'm really excited to have Pixie here to share their knowledge with us. And so just again, want to say we work in conjunction with many liaisons, with advocates, state coordinators, higher ed institutions, other organizations to work on policy. And we really want to make sure that youth with lived experience are included throughout this whole process. So whether they're helping draft bill topics or language, or even sharing their own personal stories and if they're testifying, we really want to make sure that youth voice is incorporated throughout this whole process. And so our mantra and the way that we approach this work is we really want to make sure that we're listening and we're learning, and then we're advocating and implementing. So we have this really awesome community of practice Facebook group. We had a community of practice with state policy that it's ending in November, but we have some of the recorded webinars on our website. But the Facebook group, which I'm adding onto the chat right now, is available for folks to tune in and share, best practices and learn about different trainings that you can implement in your state. And so Julian is my colleague that kind of leads that charge. And so these are some of the states that we've worked on bills throughout the year in 2021. You can see there's a lot, and we've also worked on a lot of bills in the past that actually, pass legislation. So in this slide, you can kind of see the different states that we've worked with in the past. And then also this slide kind of shows the implementation work that we're currently partnering with to make sure that this policy is actually being implemented and implemented well. And so just wanted to paint this kind of broad picture of what Schoolhouse Connection does in terms of our policy work, and really just want to reiterate the importance of practice informing policy, and then making sure that proper implementation is coming out for the policy to ultimately help these youth experiencing homelessness. So just wanted to kind of give that brief context, and we know all of this is so much easier said than done. So much work goes into the policy piece, from the beginning all the way into implementation and getting things passed. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pixie to kind of provide that policy landscape in California.
Hey, good morning, afternoon, everyone. So my name is Pixie Pearl. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the project director of the California Homeless Youth Project. We are a research and policy initiative out of the California Research Bureau that is hosted within the California State Library. And we are focused on making sure that youth and young people are brought to the policy table and that their voices are heard amongst these policy initiatives and implementation. We are also currently grant funded through the California Wellness Foundation and the Walter S. Johnson Foundation. Um, just prior to us actually starting, I would love to kind of just do a couple of polls to see kind of where folks are at.
All right, we still have a few more folks that are answering, and then we'll close the poll and share the results. A few more. All right, we'll go ahead and launch them. Oh, there's my dog.
Awesome, you should be able to see the results on your screen. And it seems like, we have actually a really good spread of folks in different landscapes of like within policy. And then Julian, do you want to go ahead and launch the second one, or do you want me to? The second one should be on your screen.
I'll give it a few more seconds. The poll only had options for 5 answers, and so if there's another barrier that's not listed here, feel free to add it in the Q&A, and then we can announce it as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much, y'all. And so here, it also seems kind of like an even spread, but this is also what I'll be kind of going over in my results of the publication that we're about to put out, is kind of this spread of what barriers are keeping us for not only even like implementing or not even like proposing policy, but actually implementing it. So thank y'all for participating in that.
All right, I need to try to find the PowerPoint. It always gets hidden amongst everything. All right, here we go.
Awesome. So just kind of giving a little bit of a background. So back in 2013, the California Homeless Youth Project put out a state action plan on ending youth homelessness. And it was called More Than a Roof. So in there were recommendations that were made and it broken down for like government or agencies or stakeholders and things like that. And these goals were actually broken out into 10 areas. So the first one was prevention and early intervention. So we wanted all of the recommendations around preventing instances of homelessness before they occur. With education, the theme was around improving educational outcomes for youth experiencing homelessness as that pathway to achieving stability and employment. The supportive services were about increasing coordination and that integration of continuum of services and those supports needed to get youth inside. Housing strategies were around increasing access to safe, stable, and affordable homes for unaccompanied youth experiencing homelessness. Health, improving those health outcomes. Juvenile justice and law enforcement are about providing the alternatives to prosecution and incarceration to ensure that law enforcement responses were decreased, and that also if there were any interactions that there was cultural competence developmentally appropriate and solution focused responses. For rural areas was making sure that rural communities even were able to have the capacity and the support to be able to support their young people experiencing homelessness. Around governance, it was established to establish ending youth homelessness by 2020 as a state priority. And that is actually one of the things that prompted to do the publication that I'll be speaking about. And the last one was research and data, continuing to pursue research agenda and data collection strategy that will help California specifically better understand the number and characteristics of youth experiencing homelessness in the state. So, Jillian, if you want to go to the next slide. So basically this year, the California Homeless Youth Project looked over the 10-year span since that state action plan had been researched. So while it was published in 2013, the data was done in 2011, 2012. And so since then, 102 bills had become state law. And within that, we looked at, anything that had crossed those intersections of youth homelessness. So whether that was education, juvenile justice, all of that. And we also looked at what was kind of the rate of passing of legislation. And so in our research, 102 out of 171 proposed bills became law. And so that's about a 60% passage rate. And while that seems, that's more than 50, still kind of a D there. But also what we're looking at, right, is the entire point of the state action plan was to pursue ending youth homelessness by 2020. So here we are in 2021, and the additional research within, right, numbers of youth in education experiencing homelessness, shelter rates, and what we see in point in time counts is that it hasn't decreased, right? So even with 102 bills passing, the situation remains the same. And so what we additionally did was we did interviews with youth and stakeholders. So that was education folks, that was nonprofit agencies, as well as legislators, and kind of just asked, trying to get their feedback about what they think had been going on. And so the kind of themes within that were funding, right? So again, kind of what y'all had even talked about is often, right, that these bills are being passed and they are not aligned with funding. So, and that kind of also connects with infrastructure, right, is that, great, we know that, youth in schools or youth going into higher education or just kind of trying to navigate the situation, we know that they need supportive services. So let's mandate that these services exist, but then there's no expanded capacity that needs to come with that funding and infrastructure, which also falls into that time. Often, even if funding is connected to things, a lot of conversation was around there is no time to implement. There's a very short amount of time to use funding, and so if you're trying to not only we need to hire someone, we need to train someone, and then we need to make sure that they have the networking and resources to be able to do their jobs the best that they can. And so even if you have that beacon of heart that all of you do, or else you wouldn't really be here, in best of intentions, the implementation is so hard because there isn't the time to do it with the quality that you want. And we know that so many folks fall through the cracks when that happens. Also within that, there's a discussion about youth visibility or kind of invisibility, is that we know that youth and young adults navigate homelessness different than this, the typical chronic, homelessness image that a lot of people see. And so whether that is that they're transient or, couch surfing or different things like that, the picture of homelessness is hard to, I guess, pin down. And often, right, we see that funding and legislation is based off of the numbers that people can see. And so that continues to perpetuate because we can't really see the entire picture of youth homelessness. Additionally, LGBTQ plus affirming and safe spaces were something that wasn't a barrier to implementation. Specifically, youth identified that there was shelters or services that were uprooted and established. However, it didn't feel safe for them. So whether that was identified as staff needed more training and education around cultural humility within the LGBTQ plus community, or housing was still sectioned off by gender or sex. And so even if a youth identified like fully, as trans, but within female, they still didn't feel safe within their housing placement, maybe not even because of the staff, but one, because of the binary, and two, also other folks utilizing those services made them feel unsafe. A big conversation topic that came out of our research was mental health. And connected to trauma and all of those things. And again, this perpetuating cycle within homelessness. And so a lot of youth and stakeholders identified that there isn't a wraparound approach to mental health as it intersects with youth homelessness or homelessness at all. And so, right, and being and experiencing homelessness is a trauma in and of itself. So folks are just trying to navigate while continually experiencing trauma. And so that created a barrier of accessing services, feeling safe in services, feeling like they could even feel the support from service providers because of that distance. As well as when accessing services, then the continuum, and so that there's no break. A lot of youth identified, oh, we did get support from a counselor or whatever, however, it was an intern, so we only get them for 8 weeks, or I did get access to medication and then I didn't get any more. And so it was this, we get connection and then the disconnection, and so that disparity perpetuated their mental health instability. And then, right, and all of that intersectionality, there's a lot of conversation about racial equity, and that also perpetuated through conversations that, again, we can do a lot of cultural humility. However, if the policies themselves do not state these intersections and aren't mindful of that, and if trainings or time to implement the changes to support intersectionality, that the disparities and discrimination continue. So all of that, really heavy for the conversation on youth homelessness always. But out of that came recommendations from youth, from stakeholders, and also from other research that has been going around, and we can review that a little bit in the resources. We have a resources slide. But basically with accessible services is kind of like what we're talking about, is that let's make sure that education, employment, financial support, food, and housing are accessible, and that encompassed a whole bunch of things. So a theme that came up was, are we making sure that they're accessible, right, by grade level of information of how it's being shared? Is it digestible? Also, is it available in multiple languages, right? And even if like a paper is offered in different languages, are service providers trained or able to speak different languages to engage with youth? Also accessible in the sense of physical ability. There is a significant disparity in wheelchair or like ADA accessible housing for folks experiencing homelessness, especially youth. In addition to the barriers of what eligibility requirements there are for accessing these services. So recommendations are to make sure that housing first or just service first implementation is looked at so that we're not getting in the way of supporting youth with supportive services. And with that, right, affirming and trained staff and service providers, but also how that carries into how we implement safe space agreements or these ground rules within services to make sure that everyone also accessing the services understand the culture of supporting youth at their intersections. And again, like emphasizing what y'all had indicated in the poll as well as the interviews, is that this funding allocation within legislation passing, as well as technical assistance, right? So great, we know that implementation is important, but is there anyone out there helping? Like, can you help me do this? That would be great. We often see, and support for ourselves, providing best practices and all of this. And I don't know about y'all, but often I see, right, like everybody wearing 27 hats, right? Of just like, you know, if you identify an issue, you tend to get stuck with being the person that is set to solve it, or address it at least, right? And so being able to actually write into policies, whether that's at the, you know, legislative level or even, you know, within agencies, is like making sure, do we have a way to support one another or ourselves and being able to implement these things. And that's prior to maybe even applying for funding or trying to start new programs. So let me just check to see if there's any questions, because I can't multitask. Okay, there's an, will you go to the next slide, please? Awesome. And so that's, you know, discussing at a really like level, you're like, okay, great, thanks. You know, but I'm, you know, I'm on the ground level. I'm trying to, you know, support youth in this, and I don't really have a say, right, in what legislation looks like. And so what can you do? So like the first part, evaluate your capacity, right? Again, how many hats do you have? Do you have the ability to take any of them off? So that would be, you know, first suggestion, or can you like let somebody borrow it? And so just kind of looking at that, you know, what is your time? You know, what are your professional limitations, right? So so my position went from being a consultant to now I am a state employee. And so my professional limitations look a lot different than they did before. And so how I can advocate or maneuver through the homelessness system is a lot different. So I have to be aware of that. What is also your orientation towards advocacy, right? So for an example, right, if we look at like the LGBT community, we know that, you know, supporting someone's pronouns and chosen name decreases suicidality and depression. However, somebody approaching advocacy for an LGBT human is different, right? Are you a person that like calls it right out there, is like, use they them pronouns please, right? Or are you someone that pulls someone to the side? Or is it kind of sitting in this like, I don't know what to do? And none of that provides any shame. And it is important to know before taking on any kind of recommendations of implementation or anything about like, where do you situate, so that you know what your capacity is. Also, energy level. We are still, I don't know how many months at this point into a pandemic, and let's be real, like all of us are operating on a thin line. And so there, again, I'm not about shame or blame. So it really is just about how do you assess about where you are before taking on anything else, or are you able to take anything off? And then once you've got all of that identified, assess what you know about the youth in your community. Do you know what the environment of homelessness looks like in your area? Whether, right, my state, is yours, you know, a school district, is yours your higher education institution? So do you know how many youth or young adults are experiencing homelessness in that region? Do you know what, you know, what their demographics are? Do you know kind of the rate, like, is there more like trans non-binary youth? Are there is there more BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color? You know, what does that look like? Is there a lot of youth maybe with learning disabilities or physical disabilities, right? Do we know what that looks like? What are their needs? And if it's like, well, I don't know, is anybody asking them what their needs are? Or is it again coming from best practice or policy, right? So are we asking? And then is how, you know, we are engaging with them, is how the institution or service community that we're connected to, are we situated to empower them? Again, amplifying their voice, asking them what they need, or making sure that, you know, we are giving them space to at least identify any of that. And then assess what you know about. So you know, do you know what your youth population looks like? And then do you know what your community looks like? Excuse me. Is, you know, what are the resources in your community? Do you know, like, say, you know, you're a school provider. Do you know what homelessness services are in your area? Or do you know where to get it? Do you know what agencies there are? Do you know what housing opportunities there are? Do you know the rights of youth experiencing homelessness in your area? It is different across the state of California, so I can imagine how different that is across the country. And so that, again, getting all of these things, and there are different agencies, right? Like Schoolhouse Connection gives these resources a lot, but is it, do you have access to this information? And once all of that happens, then it's just engage accordingly, right? So question what's happening, right? Question your policies that are within your area, within your state, within the nation around youth homelessness. If you have time, do research, right? And again, a lot of times research is done for you. Just have to research the research, right? And act. How does that work for you? An instance or an example would be, if folks don't know what this is continuums of care. So for housing and urban development, both federal and state, continuums of care are situated to oversee funding and services for homelessness in that area. And often it's deviated by either city or county, but a lot of times it can also be a collection of counties. And this is important to know because often folks are invited into those rooms or sit on the advisory boards of continuums of care, but it doesn't experience or present the entire picture. And so one thing about acting is there was a mandate that all continuum of care advisory boards were to have a youth advisory board component, right? This is one key piece to making sure that youth voice is amplified. And so there's just, even in California, that isn't even 100%. And so I don't know about y'all, but if I don't do my job and it's mandated, I could lose my job, right? But yet, here's a bigger system that there's a mandate and it isn't being met, and that comes back to implementation. And if folks don't know what is required of different entities, there is no accountability in that. And again, no shame, no blame, but continuums of care also have multiple hats. So if it's not on their radar, there isn't this ability to uphold. And that comes from somebody that is sitting on an advisory board. So know that I'm pointing the finger at myself. And then just advocate and empower is, again, from evaluating your capacity and then getting situated in what the environment looks like. What can you do with the information that you have now, and go from there. One thing that I always like to ask, I'm also a social worker. So for me, in whatever area that I have worked in, if I'm not working myself out of a job, I am contributing to the problem in some way, right? Sitting as a project director of the California Homeless Youth Project, if I'm not working myself out of a job, then I'm contributing to youth homelessness, because there should not have to be a California Homeless Youth Project, right? Because we should be ending it. I would love for the next state action plan to be checked off and all right, this job doesn't need to happen anymore. I can go get my baking truck and just go make people happy with some baked goods, right? It is important work, and I need to make sure that I'm looking at my contribution to making sure that I'm not perpetuating the problem, right? And often what I've seen with that is how can, and it's actually how I'm redirecting the California Homeless Youth Project at this point, is really being able to provide agencies or communities with information so they can advocate for themselves, right? Often we don't have the data, right, of what our area looks like or what our youth need, right? And so with that, it was okay, so how can I connect youth to other youth? How can I connect providers to other providers? How can I connect, communities to their legislature, so that this position, that just because I'm closely situated to government, that it shouldn't happen, because, right, legislation is literally an arm of the public. And so how I look at it is, how can I make sure that I can reduce that gap? And so it's really important in the work that we do of looking at, there was liaisons that had met. It was just hey, how can we put up information that folks don't have to funnel through us, and that those that do funnel through us have that high need of do we have does our website just have all the access to the resources, right? So that, a family can just be directed to, here's housing, food stamps, different things like that, and that's on a website, and then, come to us. Is there a support group for McKinney-Vento families, right? Or youth experiencing homelessness, or students experiencing homelessness on campus, right? There's research out there that identifies that peer support groups, one, provide the most accessible resources to one another because they're navigating it, but also the higher outcomes of like positive mental health, because again, they're situated around others who have this experience. So that's just some food for thought. And then if you want to go, I think the next slide is, yeah. And so again, like, talk about all of the heavy stuff. So I would love to know, and you can put it, are we doing it in the like Q&A part? Or yeah, okay, great. So just if you want to put it in the Q&A section, is like, what are you hopeful for, right? This is all, really heavy things or a lot of introspection. And we know, again, like 60% just in California of legislation has passed. So there are good things happening. We are making, movement. There are these, webinars and places to connect. And so I'm really interested in knowing what y'all are hopeful for in the future in regards to youth homelessness. And I'll give y'all a second to pop it in. If you want it to be public, you're also welcome to put it in the chat.
Yeah, I just want to say, Pixie, like, I love Schoolhouse Connection, don't get me wrong, but I hope we don't exist as well. Like, I am really hopeful that all the work that we're doing, both on the policy side and working directly with youth, that we're able to, oh, we're getting responses, that that we end the cycle of homelessness. But we got a few folks that are chiming in. People are saying they're hopeful for the ability to continue to advocate for change with their clients and not for their clients. Hopeful for more awareness to supports available for those experiencing homelessness as young adults. Again, we have another social worker saying that they're hopeful that their clients won't need them any longer.
Yeah, I love that. I really appreciate everyone's. So another person identified continuing to collaborate and advocate to provide students with the best outcomes possible. Absolutely. And then hopeful that in the state of Arizona that we'll see more housing options for unaccompanied youth. They serve as a liaison for 10 years, and it's been really hard to watch youth on their own with nowhere to go. There is a solution, and we'll end this barrier and the lack of support. And I agree, and I think all of you here are how we are going to get there. Hopeful for more collaboration to prevent youth homelessness, to not have the need for service programs. Absolutely. But thank y'all so much for participating. And y'all can please happily feel free to continue to respond, and I'm happy to share any of them out. I just want to also give y'all access to, we made a resources slide. Again, being social work oriented, I'm like, here are all of the things. So again, if maybe you don't know what the what legislation is or policies are in your area, but actually Schoolhouse Connection did research and showed that often liaisons and whether that's in higher education or K through 12 often find out the information about policies that are being mandated through webinars like this, or and so that goes to show that often it doesn't come through the channels that it needs to. And so I wanted to provide that. So on the left hand side are direct links, and you will get you'll have access to this this slide show. But the top one is the Guide to Law Online. So it provides information and resources on legal processes on each state. So there's actually, so it'll just say like where it's at, things like that. just to kind of like, again, level setting if folks don't know there. And then the second one is the state legislature map with links. So it literally is the map of the US. And then you can, when you click on your state, it actually takes you directly to that legislative page so that you can navigate what bills are happening, and you can put in what legislative year that you want to look at. If you want to have information, maybe it's like, okay, great, but I need something kind of to like come to me. The next one actually is the database to track bills by state. So you can actually just put in like key phrases like homeless youth. Again, I know we like to use person first language, but often bills don't follow that track. And so you can put in homeless youth, you can put homeless students, and then you can set for your state and it'll actually send you emails and you can say like, I want to know when something passes or something's introduced. And so that's one way to just kind of get that just directly into your email. The next one is actually like you are national briefs that come out in different categories. So you can again put in student homelessness or things like that, and it's actually an entire brief about the national progress in that area. And I thought the next one was just helpful, was just like, what are the rights for youth experiencing homelessness, right? And so it kind of navigates what those things are specific to school and then also as human rights, right? And then ombudsman's offices, right? It's just like a lot of folks maybe don't know where to go. And again, that empowerment place of just like, if you're hearing that youth are experiencing disparities or like unfair treating, ombudsman offices are there to provide rights, but also to provide support. And so that's a link to be able to get to any of them that you need to know. And then True Colors Foundation, and then also partnered with another agency to provide a state index on youth homelessness. And so what they actually did is they rated 61 different like measures, there we go, and gave a report card based on each state. So that's a direct link to that. So you can kind of see where your state lies within that. And they also gave recommendations to what should come out of that. And so that will take you directly there. I think there are 3 states that didn't participate, so it doesn't have information on 3 states.
And then on the schoolhouse side, I linked to our higher education page where we have a ton of different resources that are specific towards post-secondary education for students experiencing homelessness. We created our new FAFSA page that has all updated resources for the new FAFSA that just came out earlier this month. Our state policy slide, as well as the Facebook group. And again, I linked that to the chat as well. And then our link to state laws supporting college students experiencing homelessness. And we try to keep that as up to date as possible. And I know I'm guilty of it. Sometimes there's laws that pop up that I'm not even aware of. So I know I need to educate and do better on my end. But if we are missing a state, please let us know and we'll update this link.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I wanted to say is, so the research that I've been referencing will actually go out at the end of this week. And so Jillian and Schoolhouse Connection will get a direct link to our publication. And so y'all will all have access to that as soon as it goes up. But y'all got to have a little bit of an insight into the research prior to it even being published.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, and I just want to share, we have our Education Leads Home convening that's happening in March 2020 in Austin. If you are interested and want to learn more, the website is on the link, but our registration is still available. Pixie will be presenting on data, so please feel free to look into that and see. We're asking folks to register as a team, and we want to make sure that this work is really, cross-pollinated. So the teams can be a mixture of someone in K through 12 with higher ed, with a housing partner, or a mixed match. We just want to really ensure that folks that are coming, you're coming together as a group so you can work together and not work in silos. So more information is on that link below. And so just want to reiterate, feel free to keep asking questions or to put questions in. Our contact information is here below, but we'll see if there's any questions popping in. But Pixley, I do just have a question for you. How can we, engage youth and young people in this work? Like what has been helpful or what has worked well in everything that you've kind of been doing this last, few years or so?
Yeah, I think definitely bringing youth or getting youth to the table. And so whether that's and then thinking about accessibility within that. But so I've been doing focus groups, one-on-one interviews, also letting youth run their own group and then letting them kind of give me the information from there. But making sure any engagement that I've had with youth, they're compensated for their time, because their expertise is is just as much as any education that we can get. And so I actually make sure that anytime a youth engage, they get paid $25 an hour. And so again, like, it's not like, oh, here is a McDonald's gift card, right? Like, it's really like, I value you and your time. And so also like listening to when they say what barriers are, like really giving that a moment of life, because I think often this idea of adultism, right, happens still. I don't know if folks are familiar, but basically, and it also perpetuates through adulthood, but basically that like youth know less because they are younger, or that what they have to say or how they're processing is not as important or correct because of their life experience, right? Even with their expertise of, because everybody is an expert of their own experience. However, we can see this perpetuated even as adults, right? Of like when that whole seniority thing happens, of like you get into a new job and, oh, yeah, no, you can't say anything yet because you haven't been here 10 years. You're not a 10-year, right? Things like that. And so it perpetuates. So making sure that giving everything a moment of life, or how in those moments, instead of saying, oh, that's not going to happen, explaining what a system looks like, and so that then we can work with them to get creative on how to like kind of infiltrate that system, and renegotiate. Additionally, like listening to what barriers they've discussed and trying to get creative solutions. So for instance, a youth in Sacramento identified that funding, even when it's given to youth providers, that how then it's delineated to youth is not supportive, and that they wanted to kind of have their own say of funds. And so the youth council here actually asked, like, well, we want to write our own grants, but didn't know how. So I actually ran a 4-week, it was one day a week, but a 4-week program on grant writing. And then they wrote their own grant, and at the end of it submitted their own grant to try so that they could have their own funding. So again, I heard that funding, right, and like authority, right, were issues. And so how can we get creative? So those are kind of like some of the things, and just ensuring like that not engaging youth just to say it's a check. We talk to youth, right? Like ensuring that we're not wasting our time, because then again, for me, I don't want to perpetuate that idea of like, oh, they just, right, I'm being tokenized, or they don't actually care, because so often we're re-traumatizing youth to ask them to tell their stories, to ask us to tell them what the barriers are. And so then if nothing comes of it, it just contributes. So that's kind of some of the things that we've been navigating with.
Thanks, Pixie. Someone on the chat said that's so true. Everyone has an experience, and that experience comes with knowledge. So definitely resonating with that. I am not seeing any more questions pop up, but if questions arise, our contact information is below. Thank you so much, Pixie, for giving us the sneak peek into the report and kind of sharing your knowledge and expertise on this. I'm not sure if you have any lasting comments before we close out, but just want to say thank you again for coming on and speaking to us.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank y'all all for spending some time with us today. I keep wanting to say like morning or afternoon, but the other piece, just quickly, is that back in January we put out a report on student homelessness in higher education, and narrative is really important. And so we actually positioned that publication on resiliency. So I also think one thing just to keep in mind, and as a takeaway, is how we're talking about what's going on. When we're talking about the barriers, I think it's really important to be like, youth are experiencing, these things, but also like youth are really resilient, right? And being able to talk about that strengths perspective of how that they're navigating it, because often we can keep saying like, oh, lower grades or oh this, but like really like what are the things that they're navigating, and making sure we amplify that as we're having conversations, because again, like if only a certain narrative is being heard, then that's kind of that changes self perspective of youth as well. So that's all.
Thank you. That's super important for sharing. All right. Well, thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope you have a great rest of your day, wherever you may be in the US.
Bye, y'all. Thank you so much.
Bye.